World Bank said on Wednesday that Sub-Saharan Africa's economic growth is expected to slow this year, dragged down by slumps in heavyweights such as South Africa, Nigeria, and also Angola. And regional growth will slow to 2.5% in 2023 from 3.6% last year, and the bank said in a report before rebounding to a projected 3.7% next year and 4.1% in 2025. In per capita terms, the region has not recorded positive growth since 2015 as African countries' economic activities has failed to keep pace with their rapid increase in population. Now, to discuss this further, I'm being joined by Economist Phelisa Nkomo. Thank you so much for joining us, Phelisa, on the news today.
Listeners.
All right, so the World Bank is actually asking the major economies in Africa to create more jobs. Can they do this alone? And what role can private enterprises take in this mix?
I think there are a number of things. Firstly, let's just say, what are the key issues that the World Bank report is actually raising? The first one, it's saying that sub-African countries should not rely on the global economy for it to recover. So what it means is that it's saying African countries, you are on your own in reviving your own economy. So that's the first issue. The second issue it's also raising, it's saying that you need to improve debt servicing to make it sure that at a country level, you're able to use some of that debt to actually channel it into productive capacity of the economy. The third issue they're raising is that even though the inflation has rescinded in terms of its high levels, but it's still above the targeted levels by central banks. The other issue they're raising is that actually there is what we call fiscal imbalancing that's happening, which is this fiscal sluggishness. And so they are proposing that countries must really look at fiscal consolidation as an intervention. The other issue, of course, they are really raising, which is quite important for Africa, is around political instability, that it has massive implications. So what that means is that African countries have to then start looking at it and say, what is it that we need to do? Then the policy options at their disposal. Firstly, it's around ensuring that there's an increased access to capital, because private sector is not going to be able to create jobs if the cost of capital is higher. So there's a link between inflation and access to money or the price of money in any economy. So the higher the inflation rate, in countries, the higher is going to be interest rates, that's what central banks are actually, it's a policy instrument they're using to manage inflation at the country level. So governments need to really ensure that there's an increased capital. The other one, it's around stabilization in fiscal balancing. And that stabilization would mean that there needs to be sufficient collection of revenue. There are certain things that are kind of like more in contradiction here, which I think African countries would have to apply their minds around the sequencing of actually implementing some of the policy propositions that are coming from this report.
All right, Phelisa, sorry to cut you off there, but the continent's most developed economy, which is South Africa, is facing its worst energy crisis on record and is expected to grow just 0.5% this year. Now, this is a power issue, that affects many across Sub-Saharan Africa, but in the northern part of Africa, electricity issue has also been solved. Now, how did they do it? Hello, Phelisa, can you hear me? Hello, Phelisa, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now very well.
All right, did you hear?
The load shedding has just, yes, I can hear you very well now.
Did you get my question?
No, can you please repeat it?
All right, I said the continent's most developed economy, South Africa, which is facing its worst energy crisis on record, is expected to grow just about 0.5% this year. And, this is a power issue that actually affects many across sub-Saharan Africa. But in the northern part of Africa, electricity has actually been solved. Now, can you tell us, how did they do it?
Well, I mean, the first issue is that South Africa is really struggling through the power cuts. But then in the northern countries, amongst the key things they've done is to introduce private sector as the players. Now, in South Africa, one of the key things that has been happening has been that there's been a very strong voice or from critical constituencies amongst those with the trade unions, for example, that in fact the impact of privatization has negative consequences. And part of it has to do with the fact that once electricity is actually privatized, sometimes the focus on equity issues and access are never looked at. So in the northern countries, one of the things they've been doing, which I think South Africa is probably starting to study that, is to actually ensure that the private sector players, and South Africa is starting also to slowly introduce what we call, household generation, but also encouraging firms to start their own individual generation. But obviously, what's going to be the problem there? It means that when firms are generating electricity on their own, is that the national utility, which is Eskom, is not going to be able to actually collect sufficient revenue, which that has been the case as well in some of the countries in the northern parts of Africa. Is that now the national utilities balance sheet becomes dwindled because in essence, individual generation means that the utility is not able to earn an income. Now, one of the key proposals that we've coming up to South Africa is to make it sure that even if you are generating electricity on your own, but you need to pay a certain fee of collection, because one of the key things, you need to link energy generation to the state of the economy, to the well-being of its own citizens, but also to building a strong and resilient private sector. So all these intersecting aspects are quite important for building a resilient and very strong economy.
All right,
so, because if, for instance,
sorry to cut you off there, Phelisa, but thank you so much. We'll have to wrap up this interview at this time. Phelisa Nkomo, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to actually speak to us on this.
Thank you very much. Thank you.